in the webinar too, which is appreciated.
Yeah, you got it.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. It's good to see you all. Jim, any updates from you at all before I'm going to go with you, then see if there's anything update from Chip, and then we'll jump right on it.
Okay. Well, last week, Andrew, along with some other folks, we missed this call because we're out in Phoenix at Fizz Fest and then Robin's event. So hopefully, what I heard, it was very productive. Chip held down the fort with Leron and gave some good information to folks. So, but I've only heard that from Chip. So
Right.
So we should probably hear from other people.
Okay. Well, let's see.
Oh my God, Adam says it's the best one ever.
That's awesome, Adam. So Chip, talk to us a little about maybe if you could just give a review what it was and anything people should have taken away, etc.
So I just rejoined, guys. I'm not quite sure where you were on the.
We were kind of talking about us missing last week, but we heard it was the best one yet, and other times other people are here now are confirming it. So you're the new moderator we voted while you were
on. Well, let me go change my shirt. So I guess we want to recap last week for those who weren't.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I can do a 2-minute summary. What we talked about last week was over the course of the previous 2 weeks, we become aware through 2 different partners of I won't say a new exploit, but a new successful use of an existing flaw in Microsoft's authentication process. And SAS Alerts was not picking up the activity because about a year ago, almost to the week, our partners had actually asked us to stop logging unattended WCSS logins or non-interactive WCSS logins. And we did that. What we did pick up in both these partner cases was the subsequent activity of the attacker, which in both cases was to set up email forwarding, which, as you guys all know, and I believe at this point that every MSP that uses SAS Alerts knows that is a hot button, and leave that one set to one of the 2 alert statuses so you get tickets on it. In response to that, we told the community that we were going to do 2 things. One, we were going to immediately re-enable the WCSS sign-ins, whether they were interactive or non-interactive, so that at least we're logging them, and they will be picked up if they are outside an approved location. They'll be picked up, and we'll throw an alert because they're coming from an unapproved spot. We talked quite a bit last week about how that is only semi-effective for a couple of reasons. Number one, the smart hackers have done their reconnaissance, and they're going to be VPNing into the local region where a business is located, and more than likely, we won't catch them on an OAL. So the second thing that we're doing is we're developing a new event that is going to look, it's a correlation event that will look for WCSS logins, either unattended or interactive or non-interactive, and try to correlate them with a successful interactive standard login. And in that way, we can identify a signature that this kind of event is, without 100% certainly, but with a high degree of certainty, this kind of event is underway. This kind of attack is underway, kind of compromise. So that's where we are. We did release the change last week to bring the WCSS events back. So many of you should be seeing them in your data history, in your logs today. They are by default a low-level event, so you don't get alerts on them unless they trigger an outside approved location. Obviously, you can use those events in respond rules in any way you see fit. So if somebody dreams up a terrific respond rule that is if we see a WCSS and then we see this other thing and then we see this other thing, automatically respond to it. I think that's probably a good idea. And we are hard at work on developing this new event, this new correlation event where we're matching WCSS logins to standard login successes. So that's the recap.
Really cool. Really, really cool, Chip. That's awesome that you guys are doing that. Any collaboration that might be helpful of these if then or if then statements that would be helpful for you to hear from the team?
No, not necessarily. Although we definitely encourage partners to share the respond rules among themselves as much as possible, and with the permission of some people who are typically on this call, we've added respond rules to the template section of the respond app. So to me it does seem pretty straightforward. If you see a host of WCSS events and you see forwarding or you see other administrative MFA turned off or something like that, I think it's worth having that set up as a trigger and respond and using it as a reason to temporarily block an account until you can contact the customer and get to the bottom of it.
Very cool. Any questions, comments on that before we charge forward? No?
Comment.
All right.
For a record, 45, Andrew.
That's awesome.
That's because last week's call was so great. Like, word has gotten around that
apparently that's the situation.
Yeah. If it goes down this coming week, Chip will know that what really the real person that drives attendance is.
Exactly.
All right. So let me share out my screen, Jim, and everybody. I just would like to do a recap of where we were a few weeks back. And Jim, I can't see everything, but I'm just going to ask some folks here. Has anybody since, if you were on the call a few weeks back, have you looked into challenger sales at all? Have you given this some thought? Just why for yes, and for no. And really what I'm hoping for today, and not hoping, but I'm going to ask for, is your active participation. We're going to work collectively. If no one has done one, I'm hoping people brought some ideas, but if they haven't, we'll do this together. But let's just kind of review what Challenger Sale is and what it's about. So let me start here real quick. I'm going to jump just real quick. Here's what was discovered and regarding how people and why your customers buy, not just your customers, but most. Historically, right, we've been taught to probe, right? Ask a bunch of questions. What keeps you up at night, right? Discover, find your prospect's pain, and then match your solution to the pain. Is that, Jim, real quick? Yes or no? That's classic sales, right?
Classic.
Right. And if you think about, right, historically, that's really, it was pain, money, decision, right? And that's how people sold. Interestingly, in the probably, Challenger started going, let's just call it 2010, give or take. It might be a little earlier, might be a little later, but they found out some fascinating stuff. And the fascinating things that they found were by chance. It wasn't about, this methodology wasn't going to be a sales method. It was initially a study. And the fascinating thing they found out during the study was that people that were the purchasing really weren't interested in the probing type salesperson. In fact, to a degree, they started to find it highly annoying. And part of the reason of this trend and the aha moment I'm going to talk about momentarily as we go into this is the amount of information at our fingertips. Our prospects are going to come to the table these days anywhere between 65 plus higher percent with information already that they have about what we do or anything. Just think about yourself before you buy, right? Fair?
Fair.
And so the long and the short of it is the reason they discovered people buy was because they learned something. Now, I'm going to distill down the difference between thought leadership and a commercial insight momentarily. I'm going to give you an example of one. But it's something that pushed the purchaser, and I'll come back here now, to the degree of the sales experience. It pushed the buyer out of their status quo. It actually created friction. In fact, Jim, the example I'm going to use in a moment actually did just that as I sat next to an MSP in Phoenix where you and I were last week.
Exactly.
And so what we are going to attempt to do today is come up with a challenger statement. So this is pushing people out of their comfort zone, out of what they do day in and day out. It actually teaches our prospects something new, right? And let's talk about the difference between thought leadership and a commercial insight. I think we're all guilty. Let's just put me out there first, right? We're all guilty that, we think trends in security, statistics, right? Even just regulatory changes are going to get somebody to go, wow, we need to do something. The reality is it certainly attracts attention, but it doesn't move the needle. Again, I always ask for a touch of latitude. You may have had a case where this is counter, right? So I'm not saying every, right? But by and large, thought leadership does not get sales. Commercial insights combine these facts and data and trends with how they're impacting a particular industry, your customer, what it's doing to their business in terms of risk, revenue, cost, new markets. So let me just pause there and see if there's any questions so far. And does that make sense? Any comments? Again, I'm hoping this isn't a one-way conversation today, Jim.
Yeah. No, Andrew, I'll just jump in for a second and
please
say on the discovery side, I think ultimately we're not saying that you shouldn't also do discovery, but what a lot of salespeople do is they lean on discovery like a crutch to the point where it's almost all they do. And it gets really annoying for the prospect to just answer questions all the time. So I think you have to always balance that, need for information that you can then leverage in terms of solving a pain point with too much and overkill. And I'll give you a good example. So John Barrows, some of you may know who John Barrows is. Andrew certainly knows who he is. He's a sales training guru. He's done sales training for Salesforce.com, LinkedIn, almost every
Dropbox, you name it.
Dropbox, almost every major software company out there that people know, right? Like even like Zappos, like the shoe company, like Amazon, like he's out there and he's known. He used to be at Thrive Networks. He was our VP of sales back when I had my MSP. And he came to this realization as well and realized that discovery piece was taking way too much of the meeting. So what he did was he created what he called a sales efficiency survey. And he tried to make it as brief as possible. And he sent it to the prospect ahead of the meeting and said, in order to make our meeting more efficient and more useful for you, can you answer these questions just via drop-down email form and create it? And then he was able to collect that information. It was much more efficient than notes, by the way, because most notes then you have to go back and transcribe into your CRM. And he essentially was able to create a process where he was able to automate that and throw it right in to, at the time we're using ConnectWise. So again, understanding that you still need to do some discovery, but don't use it as a crutch and overkill. So I just want to highlight that.
Jim, before
the other thing, Andrew, that you touched on, when you started to make the comment about, people knowing more, I think, when we started selling BDRs 12, 15 years ago, people like, back up, what is it? And it was actually a pretty easy sale. Now, when we're talking to some people who think that they're educated, they're getting into, well, like, how much storage does it have? And how often are your backups? And what type, parts of our industry are becoming much more commoditized as people become more accustomed to those conversations. So it's definitely much more important to go out and, Jim, as you're talking about, having that value and a real better conversation, because everybody can find out how many computers they have and how many servers and how much storage and all that stuff.
really, really awesome point, Gary. I want to make a comment about your comment, and Jim, your comment. Gary, so for you, in terms of disaster recovery and continuity and disaster recovery, we can talk about, maybe that's what we do today, about building a commercial insight about beyond your BDR, right? Meaning, what's your incident response plan, right? And the trends of recovery for companies that have not only an incident response plan, but a tabletop, have tested it, and the reduction in the cost if there is and when there is an incident. And we could go on and on and on, right? My point being is that you're exactly correct. They now come loaded with the front part of the information, but the insight might be about all the other things about SLAs, their supply chain, and the impact to their business. So that's awesome. Jim, to your point, I agree wholeheartedly. It can't all be just one-sided. But what the buyers in the surveys said was, if you come with something of value, then I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Right.
But you have to start with something that's valuable for me and earn that right, versus, Jim, what keeps you up at night?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So the other part, when our dialer is setting appointments for our sales rep, he's not talking about, hey, we want to talk about IT services. The premise of our conversation is, hey, Jason's out in the community talking to businesses about things that are going on in the industry and would like to share with you some of the trends. That's the conversation. We're not talking about their IT support, in theory. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. You've got to have a different conversation.
Yeah, really good stuff. Any others before we go on? Really good stuff, Gary.
Yeah, I just want to expound on that a little bit. I'm Aaron. I'm with Watchdog Cyber. I think this is the first time I've been on one of these calls. So, for us, the way we're going out there is, we're talking about the business risks associated with doing business nowadays, right? I mean, anybody can go in there and run a scan and figure out what technology you have and bore them to death and make them confused as hell by the time the meeting is over, right? With all the different acronyms of EDR, BCDR, SaaS, all of that. They don't care about that. What they want to know is, they've got somebody that's got their back as far as providing services to their end, ensure that the business is still to be on a secure manner, and they want to know within a budget that is, not going to break. We're in this business, right? We all know that the services we offer, definition than for them to hire these types of services outright with actual staff. So that's kind of what we target with our talk track, and it's starting to turn some heads at this point.
That's excellent, Aaron. So what you're saying is prospects don't want to know about the 5,000 CVEs that you discovered on their network.
They want to know about it, but they don't care about the detail of it, right? They want to know that, they want to know, all right, you guys have a pretty large vulnerability, or attack surface, right? And we can help mitigate a lot of your risk. And we can help mitigate almost all of it. It all depends on how much do you want to spend to mitigate your risk? What level of risk are you willing to accept, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's a great point about, where we miss a lot is, do we understand even the risk profile and tolerance, right, of a company where we can create different kind of schemas or personas. So really good point. Other things people want to say or comment. I'm glad you're joining us, Aaron. I
uploaded a live, right now, link that kind of touches on that by John from LinkedIn. And then if people want to explore further, then they can follow his page or whatever. But there's a topic right there.
Thanks,
nice.
John.
Are you guys, Aaron, are you in 7-figure MSP by any chance? Aaron, you still there?
No, I'm with Technology Marketing Toolkit.
Okay, cool. Okay, because
we're going to do it.
Said, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the talk track and messaging.
No, okay,
cool.
I've been talking about 2 years.
Okay, great.
Jimmy, I'm going to do something with JB. Quite a bit of few things coming up here with. Hopefully, we'll bring him here. But I'll
that'd be great. I just texted him to try to get the sales efficiency survey.
Okay, perfect.
He'll get back to me today.
Yeah. Okay, so insights. What are these characteristics, right? They highlight. I don't have to read this to you, but you can see here what it is. The characteristics. But the big thing I think we want to take away is we need to advance the sales cycle. And if we're going to just provide thought leadership, it's nice, right? But we're trying to get action. Does that make sense? The difference between, hey, that's really interesting. That's a profound change. But if it's not, correlated to their business, we can't drive forward. Fair?
Fair.
All right, so I created one here, Jim and everybody. And this is one of the ones that rubbed one of the MSPs. It was a great conversation, Jim. We were sitting at, I think it was lunch or breakfast.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, again, if you're like, well, there's no way it's that dollar versus that dollar, just the intent is to give you a sense of a commercial insight.
Yeah.
So here it is, right? So MSPs with $2 to $5 million in ARR typically spend $300 to $400K on business development. So think business development, sales, marketing. Gary, you just mentioned you've got somebody, cold calling, building lists, etc. Right? Not for the faint of heart, not cheap. So data gather, I'm not going to go into the sources, suggests that 80% of these activities individuals do day in and day out can be automated, right? So these are solutions like Owl or ChatGPT and integrated with HubSpot for a fraction of the price. So they're saving the organization hundreds of thousands of dollars. So successful sales-driven MSPs now are reallocating dollars into higher value functions. Sound familiar, by the way, like what an RMM did?
Yeah.
Right? For the MSP.
Right.
We got the same efficiency. We increased massive efficiency for a fraction of the cost so that we could reallocate those engineers, right, to higher value things. The same thing's happening in the world of sales. And so BDRs and SDRs are, this is where it rubbed somebody the wrong way, Gary. It's cool that you have one. At first, as I'm talking about this, I'm like, they're dinosaurs. So that statement rubbed them because they have one. But when I explained that, we're not saying getting rid of that person. We're going to reallocate how they do their job in the 21st century. Because if you're going to have them do those things that they do day in and day out, there's other companies that are going to do it for a fraction of the cost, have twice as many, 3 times as many, and get way more appointments because they're focusing on actually what moves the needle. So let me just pause there. Does that, again, I'm not suggesting I'm a commercial insight guru. So please, again, this may have flaws in it. It may not be perfect. But I want to suggest of how we've gone from more just, hey, the trend is automation. Well, we know the trend is automation. I can pull all sorts of email stats and stats around, things that are, moving efficiency and how it's affecting, the sales world, right? But see how we're tying it back to actual key data points that affect your OpEx, your COGS, and things like that, and how the industry is evolving. Does that make sense?
I think it does. Here's the thing, and this is why you gave the homework, Andrew. I think that like initially it might be intimidating to try to figure out what some of these insights might be, but everyone that's called, they're smart people. I bet if they sat down for a couple hours and just said, okay, I'm going to spend time with a couple members of my team trying to come up with some really good commercial insights, guaranteed they're going to come up with good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think last thing I'll say, and I'd love now then it'll be time for everybody else and I'll be quiet. But again, Gary, I love what you said about BDR, because a commercial insight is majority, right? Forget even the majority of MSPs don't have good incident response plans and haven't tested them via tabletops, right? Let alone our customers, right? Mm-hmm. And we, beyond a shadow of a doubt, right? Beyond BDR is a component of obviously a compromise. It better be, or we're in big trouble. Mm-hmm. But the bigger piece of the equation in now is, everything from how, incident reporting, right? For authorities, the cost of all of the reporting, right? Having to disclose to authorities, having to disclose to customers, reputational damage. And we could go on and on and on and on of companies that are prepared and use it as actually a wedge to better work with their customers and show due care to their end customers. And lastly, I'll say, and I forget the gentleman who is on with us here, Jim, I'll stop sharing, but it was really interesting. And if I'm hoping the person's on, but the commercial insight was interesting where they have to advertising customers, Jim. I don't know if you remember the person on our call. Mm-hmm. They have advertising clients who they've been trying to sell their enhanced security package to, and overall their solution. And it was going nowhere until their customer's customer handed them a security questionnaire and said, if you're going to do business with us, you need to fill this out and and make sure that all of these things are in place. Well, if we backed all of that out and they did get the deals, 2 of them, well, the commercial insight was about the ramifications of not having a good security program and what it could cost the business downstream to loss of the competition that is well prepared. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And people that realize this, it's just an advantage.
And it's an insight. We're taught, like, again, that is dollars and cents to your end customer. We're trying to talk about the importance of MFA for MFA's sake. And yes, it's important. But really what the impact is how having a security program, in this instance, this small example I'm talking about, actually impact or could have impacted their end customer's business. So let me stop there, Jim. I'd love comments from the folks out there. If someone would like to be so bold, I hope. I was gonna say Andy Rowe must not be here. Anybody want to
behave?
Give some insight or thoughts?
I think it's great. My business's struggle is still where you touched on with the consumer smarter today, or maybe they have an MSP that they've had for 5 years, 10 years, and now MSPs are rolling out security kind of one at a time. They're not just necessarily coming out with that advanced security package, at least not here. And so the frame of mind of a prospect is, no, we're good. And it just stops, and it's like, well, the penetrate, free, the test, well, let's just make sure. Let's just think, no. And I'm like, okay. I mean, what? And so it's sure, you can get the prospects together and do a training and become the but it's like kind of like you got to go way around. I still haven't found a successful way to get to this conversation. Now, once we're here, this is wonderful. But that would just be my comment, is that with a complacent, if you will, and I'm talking about law firms and CPAs, and they have cyber insurance that I'm sure they're not compliant with, and it's it's kind of a standard Floridian or American way where now we're good, until seatbelts are the law, no one's wearing them.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that, Scott, especially that you mentioned law firms and CPAs. Have you talked to them about the change in the Microsoft terms of use yet?
The secretary is not going to care too much.
Oh, so you're on the prospecting side you're talking about, like when you're trying to get a call, when you're trying to get a meeting.
Just because of the smart consumer or the false sense of security or the no one I know it's happened to. I'm like, well, no one told you it happened to them. How many people were saying they got COVID the first 6 months of COVID? If you got it, nobody.
Right.
But then it didn't matter. So it's not like something you sit around the table and talk about. Yeah, I got breached, So I'm saying to get in to be any type of benefit to them whatsoever. It's this type of thought pattern I wish could back up one conversation earlier to help so much. And I know it's tough and no one really has the answer. John didn't have the answer. Barrows.
What do you mean by back up?
Well, yeah.
In time to where they are not a referral and they are a
cold prospect. Yeah.
That's exactly the point, Scott. I mean, you said it, the status quo. That is the whole point of a commercial insight, is rubbing them, not pissing them off, but rubbing them out of the status quo. And hence, what we have to do, our collective job on this call, is to work together to come up with what's going to push somebody off. Doing a scan, comparing them to the, how they're doing it today. The old days of wouldn't you want to know what other people of similar size and complexity are doing. Yeah, it's nice, but it's not commercial insight.
Yeah. I think, Andrew, what Scott's trying to say is he feels like he can maybe have that conversation once he gets to a decision maker in one of these places, but talking to a gatekeeper right now, he can't get to that conversation because the gatekeeper essentially is right there. So he needs some ammunition for those folks to get to the people that can make the decision.
Right. And I'm with you, Jim, 100%. But I'm saying if you tell a gatekeeper, here's what, the standard protocol of what we say and do, they're hearing it from every MSP. So the whole point of how are we going to, and again, it's numbers, right, Scott? You may never, but again, we've got to be creative. We've got to look either, how we're going to come out that. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole there, but I promise to come back to it. But your methodology, and AJ, I'm going to come to you momentarily. Thanks for your patience and having your hand up. The point being is that if we don't have something different and unique that we can knock somebody, they're not, again, we live in a world, it's the incredible. Remember the movie The Incredibles, when everybody's incredible, nobody is? Well, everybody's heard all the stats. Everybody knows all the breaches.
Yeah, I completely agree.
That's not going to move somebody anymore.
Right.
AJ, what you got?
I completely agree with you, but I think whether you're addressing a C-level person or a gatekeeper, I think it's about translating that data into a good narrative, because at the end of the day, it's just numbers to them. And if you can make them feel like there is some sort of pressure, and unfortunately, fair is really the key in this industry a lot of the time, I find that you're more likely to reach through to somebody, but you have to paint a picture that's unique enough to them that they feel motivated to make some kind of change.
I love the word you just used. I'd love for you to continue, but you used the key word, feel. If emotion isn't created, like when I sat next to, it was Derek Gabriel. If you guys know Derek, he's awesome. And I used my dinosaur VDR SDR piece with him. Like, it rubbed him because he has one and he's spending money. It's like, screw you, I pay good money and they're doing their job and they're not a dinosaur. Until I explain to him the trends and the costs and what's going to happen. So then, but I had emotion in him because I rubbed him, not in a way where he was angry, but I got under his skin a little for him to go, well, I'm going to listen here.
And I think you talked earlier about the money that's put into trying to move people one way or the other. I think the issue is a lot of times people just throw reports at people. I've never seen a report and been moved to action. It's just the opposite of how most people operate. And I think a lot of it comes down to face-to-face meeting when you want to convince somebody to feel a certain or move them a certain way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think one of the things from a tactical perspective, right, because it can sometimes be more difficult to get a face-to-face meeting with somebody than maybe inviting them to a lunch and learn or to a webinar where you can actually have an open conversation and be in a better position to educate, because they're coming into that conversation and if they attend that webinar or that lunch and learn, they're walking in with a mindset of, I'm going to try to learn something here today. That's why they're attending and spending their time, which is the most valuable thing they have. So my thought is maybe if we as staff stars created a webinar template that had commercial insights in there for you that you could leverage to the end user, right? So put it in your hands and you use it as a webinar or a lunch and learn, either one. Would folks want that? Would they leverage it? Because if the answer is yes, Andrew, I think we'd be willing to do that, spend time to actually do that, and then test to see how it works. If you guys are willing to put the effort in to marketing to your customers and prospects of that content.
And I think the key is also it's that final leg, because if you're dealing with one person who really cares about the message of their business versus someone else who's just worried about dollars and cents. You got to tailor the message to who you're working with. Otherwise, it's going to go in one ear and right out the other.
Well, it's funny you mentioned Taylor, man. Are you a challenger connoisseur, AJ?
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay. Because so right, we want to teach, and then the next piece is Taylor, right? We got to figure out who we're talking to. Yeah, I mean, there's no question, right? Appointment setting. That's why JB, John Bowers, that Jim was talking about, his ongoing training has two components always, getting appointments and driving the close. Scott, if getting appointments was easy, right? Right.
I'm just saying, I'm saying that, whether I'm saying this is great.
Other comments, and then let's, Jim, because we only have 15 minutes left, what I would say is I'd love any other comments, and then let's set ourselves up for success for the next call. Let's each take some homework, and what I would recommend doing, first, and you tell me, guys, MSPs, is I would, as Jim said, it's going to take a little homework, but think about something you've purchased, a service you've purchased, where you thought about it one way and you ended up purchasing it, and kind of maybe dissect it a little bit. What happened? What happened to change your perspective that made you do something and spend money? Because if you understand how you did that and why you did it, then you can kind of say, okay, if someone just said to me, like, hey, again, let's just use an easy example. You're using XYZ EDR right now, right? None of you are ever going to get another phone call, right, from another EDR vendor. Is that about fair? Ever. Right. So in and of itself, is that EDR vendor going to get your time unless they simply hit it where you're pissed at your current provider, they're messing up, right? So that they're going to have to come to you with some kind of insight, right, to move you. Otherwise, you're too busy, aren't you? Just like your prospect. Wouldn't you like to compare our EDR to your EDR? Scott, to your point, right? Do you have time?
No.
Well, neither your prospects. So comments before we kind of maybe, figure out how we want to attack this and who and how we dig this up.
Jim, I'll address your question. I belong to Empath Cyber as well, just everyone. And with Wes, and we're working on doing a collaborative, not all together. I mean, we're collaboratively working on a specific vertical to do a lunch and learn a presentation for. So I would certainly utilize it and give you feedback. And I think we're on the right track where it's not going to show a bunch of statistics, maybe a slide of necessary ones, but using this psychology, it sounds like it would be a worthy one. So when you say, will you all utilize it? Well, if it's good, I mean, it's just like anything else.
Right.
But I think if it utilizes this aspect that we've been discussing, then I certainly would see it. I'd give you pure feedback.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great. That's something we can definitely put on the list of things we can start creating, because ultimately, and this is the whole point of the challenger sale Andrew's bringing up, is that once you're in the position as educator and people are willing to accept what you're giving them as information and as important educational information, then you're in a much better, they're willing to buy from you because they're finding that much value. You put yourself in a completely different headspace in their mind, as opposed to just people just, dialing for dollars all day trying to get a meeting so they can try to, sell you something.
Yeah. Well, that's what it is going to be as an educator. It's not, there will be bourbon and cheese, but that's just as an incentive. It is as an educator. It's not pitching the company. It's not just happen to be the provider of the information to become educator in this market that provides something for all of our clients. And I just finished the Jolt Effect, and I got the Challenger book, so it's next. So I'll be up to speed.
Yeah.
Jolt Effect is really good too, as a book.
Awesome.
Cool. Put on the list.
Others, comments. So how about, poll you guys? Yeah, thanks, Rafi. Yeah, it's a great book. So what do you feel? Let's pick one or two topics. Trends, things that impact an organization that you talk to. Can you guys think of something that you've had a really good conversation that you guys got a sale, where it was something you really knew about, an industry you really knew about, because something was going on, it impacted their revenue, it impacted their rep, and it wasn't necessarily your standard pitch? Anybody?
This is being recorded. I don't care. I had to because I've been too mad internally, playing it all smooth and inside and burning up. Because of this, everyone thinking that, it doesn't really happen. I know of a particular CPA firm that's gone because of a cyber attack. So since they're gone and they're local, I used it. And I told the prospect exactly what happened, just straight up, like if it was an important national, T-Mobile, 94 million, things, like that's right on our street. It's the same street. I said, you just don't learn about it because it's bad business for everyone to know about it. And they're not required to tell anybody. And it's not going to meet the local news. It might be somewhere online. And so I just straight up, and it was the only way they could associate this could happen to me at that particular time with those particular people. I had the evidence and I spoke very plain English. Everything was fine. I wasn't putting fear factor. I wasn't doing any of the token stuff. But then it still wasn't sticking. And they had cyber insurance that they didn't comply with at all. And I'm like, and they still weren't going to really, and I'm like, all right, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they're gone, right? Yeah. You think they just went out of business? No. And I wonder what happened to them. So that was an alternative method. I didn't feel too comfortable because I guess it's past. It's all right. I feel comfortable. But I didn't care at that point because of the naivety. You're being so naive. It's like, how about if your company and everyone that works for you is just out of jobs? I don't like to say, I would never say that, but that's what I feel like, this is what we're talking about, But again, then I think of the seatbelt. It's like, well, what if you flew through your windshield out on the street and you got in an accident? It still had to be the law. Yeah. So it's kind of, I know I'm self-defeating myself, but it's still like, that's how hard it is. And like, I think Florida is special with that. We don't care about hurricanes, alligators, car accidents, guns, cyber attacks. But I just, yeah. So I did use that. It was unique. It was outside of the coloring box. It wasn't about statistics. It was about the guy, right? You could almost shoot a BB gun at, where they were. And then that worked.
Yeah. Because it moved them. Right. The end
result. They could relate. It was something like your neighbor got broken into. Now, do you want the alarm? If you could verify, because your neighbor comes over and says, oh, my TV, my dogs, everything got stolen, my kids.
But that's a little.
And then you're like, oh, really? In our neighborhood? Yeah. And then that hits home and you're like, shit.
Yeah. And so I'm glad you got the deal. So, but so I want to just come back to, so for Challenger sale though, that wasn't necessarily, a challenging moment. To me, it was the fact that they could relate. It was so relatable, right? And they understood what they did relate was that company's out of business. It was a very painstaking, wow, if we don't do this, I can see the result. Now, somewhere in there is the challenge, right? But again, we have to keep in mind the FUD, right? If this happens, you'll go out of business, blah, 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 blah. That was real enough because they could literally visually see it, right? But does anybody want to take a stab at something that you feel could move, that we could develop over the next week or so?
Well, I want to comment on kind of what you were talking about, not necessarily the question you just asked, but my son and I were out at a prospect. They're a rehabilitation center in our market, growing relatively rapidly, and you talk about talking about risk and all that, and we been doing this a long time, and it's probably one of the most cavalier responses that we've ever had. Well, oh yeah, if we get a HIPAA fine, we'll just pay it, and it's going to be cheaper than paying you guys, $8,000 a month. Aren't you worried about the reputation in the community? These are drug addicts. We don't really care. We're being paid by insurance, and it's like you look at some of these people who think they are so much smarter than they are, and when you talk about the risk and the things of inaction and the responses, it's like pure negligence. And I got to the point where we just had no response. Hey, listen, if you want to move forward, it's great. And I don't know that we want the guy as a client, honestly, because I'm afraid that no matter what the conversation is, that they're never going to take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking about PHI here, patient information.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, and that can be, you can obviously, Gary, you can get people like that. But maybe, just curious, and I'm sure you did, and I don't want to get too far off again because we only have a few minutes, but so they're like, we'll just pay it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Did you get a sense of, hey, sounds like what you're, I would just be like, hey, sounds like what you're doing. Can I just ask you a question? How long you guys been in business?
Very short. I won't go to the he's no longer an accountant. We'll leave it at that.
But a lot of times, it's, when let's just say it was an organization in business a long time, right? Like they're drug addicts. They don't care about their PHI, right? What you can go there, the commercial insight is, have you heard about some of the new reporting and some of the new regulatory fines, whether the people are active or inactive? And
he didn't. We talked about that actually, and he is. Don't go down. Go back to what you're saying. The problem is, no matter how good we are, there are some people that we're going to meet that it just doesn't matter. This was one of them.
Yeah. Here's my point. I was just going to finish the role play.
Yep.
Pretend over the course of the years they have 400,000 records. And the average record cost is $250,000. And so it sounds like, going to be a bit of a wise guy here, Gary, that you guys got a cool, 20 million sitting around and that won't even impact your business. I'm not sure it sounds like we're not a fit, but, that's the sense I'm getting here. Do I have things correct? And so you're going to get people like that where you're going to possibly, you don't want to be adversarial.
That's the problem. In the sales meeting, that's what we had to avoid.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to get people like that. All right. So in 2 minutes, does anyone want to posture what we can come back with collectively? We'll take one What do you think about business continuity, right of boom type things, having disaster recovery plans, incident response plans, reputation, risk to reputation? Is that one? I don't want to give it to you.
I think the key is whoever you're working with, if you can just get them to see from our perspective, even if it's only 5 or 10 seconds, if they can for a moment look at their business through the lens of risk, I feel like you're set. And the hard part is, of course, getting there. But
right, and that's the point. Is I don't disagree with you, AJ. I'm saying, what commercial insight do you guys want to take away and work on, so that when we come back next week, we can actually delve in and. Anybody?
I think if you can find a conversation that counters the commoditization of our industry, it's those kind of topics that I think are the most challenging, because our prospects are hearing the same thing from lots of people.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think Wes was trying to chime in.
I was just going to bring up something that we're working on in-house. I don't know if this is a good place or a good fit for it, but using the cyber defense matrix to educate the client about, once you kind of explain it to them from the strategy, the planning and everything else, and they understand what they're looking at, then there's an aha moment of, oh, I see where my risk is. They realize that they're not doing anything for their identifying what data is in their environment. And so they don't really know whether or not their protection layers and detection layers are effective. Mm-hmm. So again, I don't know if it would be a good one to kind of put on the pile, but that's what we're working on, and using that tool to educate.
You coming to write a boom, Wes?
No, yeah, it's sold out next year.
We have a ticket or two left if you want to come, but Sunil's our keynote speaker.
Oh, really? Excellent.
Yeah, actually, we have a ticket left. If you want to go,
I might take you all up on that.
Okay, just email me, jim@sasslers.com.
Yep, got it.
All right, Jim, we're at the top. I'm going to throw out a few ideas that Michelle will get to everybody. I'm really hopeful. I appreciate you guys all coming, the contribution. Jim, any closing comments?
John Barrows just got back to me on the meeting efficiency survey, and it's online. So for those folks that wanted it, there it is. I just put it in the chat. So, and I'm talking to him after 5 o'clock today, so maybe we can get him on one of these calls, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, we'll do a webinar with him. Yep. I'm doing a few with him coming up here.
Okay, cool.
Eric said, how about a different angle, productivity, efficiency? Eric, can you email me your thoughts and I'll.
Sure, love to.
Thanks, bud. Good to see you, man.
Yeah, nice to see you again.
All right, everybody, have a fantastic week. Be strong, be safe. We'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Have a good week, guys.
Have a good one.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.